Did you know that Pepsi once had the sixth largest navy in the world? A surprising fact, isn't it? But to understand how a soft drink company found itself commanding a fleet of submarines, we need to rewind to the era of the Cold War. This was a time of tense global politics and ideological rivalry. But it wasn't just nations that were competing. Two iconic American brands were also engaged in a fierce battle of their own. This was the Cola Wars, a battle for global market dominance between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. In the early days, Coca-Cola had the upper hand, being the first to extend its reach beyond American borders. But Pepsi was not far behind. In the mid-1950s, Pepsi broke through the Iron Curtain and entered the Soviet market, a territory that had been virtually untouched by Western brands. The deal was simple and clever. Pepsi would supply its concentrate to the USSR, and in return, they would receive Stolichnaya vodka for sale in the United States. This was a win-win situation for both parties. Pepsi got a vast new market, and the Soviets got a taste of Western capitalism in the form of a fizzy caramel-colored drink. For decades, this arrangement worked out quite well. Pepsi's foothold in the USSR grew stronger, and the company enjoyed the profits from the vodka sales in the US. However, as the 80s drew to a close, things were about to take a dramatic turn. In 1989, due to the USSR's invasion of Afghanistan, the United States imposed sanctions on Soviet products, including Stolichnaya vodka. This hit Pepsi hard, as the company could no longer sell Stolichnaya in its main market. Around the same time, Pepsi's contract with the USSR was also nearing its expiration. The company needed to renegotiate its terms, but with its primary form of payment now off the table, it was entering uncharted waters. But in 1989, the landscape shifted dramatically. Pepsi's vodka market was drying up, and their contract with the USSR was about to expire. This was the beginning of a new chapter in the Cold War Cola Wars, one that would take an unexpected naval twist. The US imposed sanctions on Soviet products, including vodka, after the USSR invaded Afghanistan. This development had a ripple effect on a variety of businesses, one of them being Pepsi. The sanctions meant Pepsi found itself in a tight spot, as it could no longer sell Stolichnaya, a popular Soviet vodka, in its main market. At the same time, Pepsi's contract with the USSR was on the brink of expiration. The company was faced with the task of renegotiating its terms in a drastically different political climate. But Pepsi wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The CEO at the time, Donald Kendall, decided to take matters into his own hands. Kendall, the man who had personally arranged the deal with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev 3 decades earlier, packed his bags and flew to Moscow. In the heart of the Soviet Union, Kendall met with Soviet officials. He was there with a clear mission: to secure a deal for his company. He asked for a rather hefty sum, $3 billion worth of payment for his syrup. But the Soviets were in a bind. Their economy was crumbling under the weight of economic sanctions, and they had no hard currency to offer in return. In this high-stakes game of corporate diplomacy, both Pepsi and the Soviet Union were in a bind. Pepsi needed to sell its product, and the Soviets needed a way to pay for it. The stage was set for a negotiation unlike any other, one that would go down in history as one of the most unusual deals ever struck. Kendall asked for $3 billion worth of payment for his syrup, but the Soviets had no hard currency to offer. With both sides at an impasse, the question remained, how would they resolve this predicament? The answer, as it turned out, would be as unexpected as it was unprecedented. Stay tuned to find out how this remarkable story unfolds. The Soviets proposed an unusual alternative: a fleet of naval vessels. As negotiations between Pepsi and the Soviet Union reached a stalemate, the Soviets put forth an idea that was nothing short of extraordinary. They offered a fleet of naval vessels in lieu of the $3 billion they owed Pepsi. It was an unorthodox barter, but the Soviets were out of hard currency, and this was their best bet. Donald Kendall, Pepsi's CEO, who was no stranger to unconventional deals, agreed to this outlandish proposal. He found himself the proud owner of a fleet that would make any maritime enthusiast green with envy. 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. These were not the usual assets on a soda company's balance sheet. Imagine for a moment the surreal sight of this armada sailing under the Pepsi logo. It would have been a spectacle to behold, a fizzy drink company commandeering a fleet that once formed a part of the mighty Soviet Navy. But of course, Kendall had no intention of playing admiral. The vessels were not to be Pepsi's seafaring armada, they were merely a means to an end. This fleet, which had once patrolled the icy waters of the Arctic and the Baltic, was destined for a fate far removed from its glory days. Pepsi sold the entire fleet to a Swedish company for scrap metal, turning a tidy profit of about $3 million, a shrewd business move that underscored Kendall's acumen. In a twist that would have made for a great punchline at a naval gala, this unusual deal catapulted Pepsi to a position of naval dominance, at least on paper. This fleet, however temporary, made Pepsi's navy the sixth largest in the world at that time, surpassing those of countries like Australia and Spain. It was a moment of absurdity, a moment that would forever be etched in the annals of corporate history. But for Pepsi and Kendall, it was just another day at the office. As Kendall later joked, he was disarming the USSR faster than Reagan. Of course, Pepsi had no intention of keeping or operating these ships. The soda giant, now an unexpected naval power, was in a predicament. What does a soft drink company do with 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer? The answer was as clear as the bubbly drink itself: sell them. Pepsi turned to a Swedish company, eager to offload the fleet of naval vessels. The company was in the business of scrap metal, and these ships, though perhaps past their prime, had plenty of metal to offer. It was an unconventional transaction to say the least. A deal between a soda company and a scrap metal business, brokered over a fleet of Soviet naval vessels. Yet, it was a deal that would prove profitable for Pepsi. The company sold the vessels for a tidy sum, making a profit of about $3 million. It was a testament to the ingenuity and business acumen of Pepsi's leadership. They had taken a seemingly impossible situation, a payment in naval vessels from a country with no hard currency, and turned it into a profitable venture. It was a win for Pepsi, a win for the Swedish company, and a win for the Soviets, who were able to fulfill their obligation without dipping into their scarce reserves of hard currency. But perhaps the biggest winner was Donald Kendall, the CEO of Pepsi, who had orchestrated the entire affair. This unexpected naval venture had turned Kendall into a sort of international diplomat, brokering deals on the world stage. He had navigated the choppy waters of international politics and business with the finesse of a seasoned admiral, and he had a sense of humor about it too. Kendall later joked that he was disarming the USSR faster than Reagan. His statement was a nod to the disarmament efforts of the time, and a tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. It was a moment in history, a fizzy anecdote in the annals of the Cold War, where for a brief time Pepsi indeed ruled the waves. The deal was a unique solution to an unusual problem. Indeed, Pepsi's naval fleet was a fleeting anomaly, a blip in the annals of corporate history. But the implications were far-reaching. The unusual deal not only saved Pepsi's operations in Russia, but also bolstered its standing in the ongoing cola wars. The tangible benefits were immediate. The sale of the naval vessels for scrap metal netted Pepsi a cool $3 million. But beyond the financial gains, the deal also signified Pepsi's adaptability and willingness to navigate uncharted waters, literally and figuratively, for the sake of business. In Russia, the deal cemented Pepsi's position as the country's preferred cola. The brand had already been selling in the USSR for 2 decades before this, but the naval deal was a clear sign that Pepsi was there to stay. It demonstrated Pepsi's commitment to the Russian market and its readiness to negotiate with the Soviets on their terms. Meanwhile, in the broader context of the cola wars, the deal was a PR coup. Pepsi was in the headlines not just as a soda company, but as a global player that could negotiate complex international deals. The story of the naval fleet gave Pepsi an edge, a certain je ne sais quoi that set it apart from its main competitor, Coca-Cola. In the end, the naval deal was more than just a quirky footnote in Pepsi's history. It was a testament to the lengths a company would go to stay afloat in a competitive market. It showcased the art of the deal, the willingness to think outside the box, and the audacity to sail uncharted seas. And that's the story of how Pepsi became the unlikely owner of the world's 6th largest navy, even if it was just for a moment.